Is there anything there that you look at being a firefighter? Have there been mistakes made?
Yes, it's a absolute cluster F of a disaster in terms of the government response. We're some of the highest taxed people in the world, and we don't even have basic infrastructure. All the suspicions you may have in terms of the prioritization of DEI and equal opportunity rights and all that, instead of merit-based hiring and leadership, that's the problem, 100%. This is a big deal. There's gonna be an exodus out of California.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name is Austin Bronner, and I'm here with my co-host, Cody Shirk. Dude, how was North Carolina? You're back in Florida. How was your time up north?
It was cold. We were in Charlotte and then just outside of Charlotte in Lake Norman, and it never or rarely snows there, maybe one day a year. And of course, we were there for the day it snowed, and the roads got frozen over, and it was a classic. It kind of snowed into a log cabin scenario. But we had a good time. Beautiful up there. Charlotte's a really clean city. I was really impressed by its growth, and it's just a booming area of the U.S. So it was a great time.
So when you're snowed in, North Carolina, they don't get much snow. The people just kind of like, it just shuts everything down.
Oh, yeah. Everyone just gave up. And by the way, it snowed like an inch or two.
Yeah.
But the next day, everything froze. So all the roads are really slippery and everything. You know, they shut schools, rest. Everybody, I think, was looking for an excuse to have a little day off. Teachers, students,
teachers,
parents,
number one.
everybody.
Teachers are like, number one, I'm not going in.
Totally. But you're in my favorite place in the world right now. You're in Cabo. Tell us about that.
Cabo's wonderful. I've been in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, and feels so good to have just pure sunshine down here and recharge a little bit in the winter time. Go in the pool, get some vitamin D. Just feel, truly some of the best weather. I mean, it is like coastal California weather down here, and that whole area of Baja, I think you combine that all the way up into San Diego and Los Angeles, and the weather is just so good. It's so consistent, and it feels so nice.
And it's not like super
bugs.
swampy. Yeah, exactly.
No,
it gets
no
a little
bugs,
humid.
no humidity.
It gets humid in the summer in Cabo, but during the fall, winter, spring, it's surprisingly dry. It's a great area of the world. I love it.
It is. I mean, it's truly San Diego South, and it's hilarious because it's all designed to.
A little bit trivia for you.
To extract. What's that?
Yeah,
Americans.
I got a little bit trivia for you. There's the Humboldt Current that runs up from South America up along North America, and it gets really close to the coastline in northern Baja, and the water is cold there. So you can be in the summer in San Diego or LA, and the water's kind of warm to surf, and then it stays really cold, and that creates this weather scenario in northern Baja from the cold water that's like really foggy and cold, but it also creates this environment that's like strangely temperate, or is that what the word is? Yeah, where it just stays kind of consistent throughout the year. So Baja is totally underrated. Amazing place.
So, some of the best trips I've ever done have been when I lived in Los Angeles, driving south, going across the border, going down past Ensenada, and then going spearfishing and diving for lobsters off the coast, and then surfing. So we would just like spearfish and then surf. It was incredible.
That was my whole childhood and into my 20s. We off-road down to the middle of Baja, and it's interesting because on one hand, you're close to some of the largest metropolises in the world, Mexico City, Los Angeles, but then in that area, Baja, it's some of the most remote areas in the world as well. It's very cool.
It's also just a reminder of how insane real estate is, because it's the same environment, and you cross down, and just because it's more dangerous, there's less stuff going on, like there's less amenities. It's the same environment though. Like the houses that are down in Ensenada and south of Ensenada, they have incredible access to the beach. It's like even better, yet it's a fraction of the cost of getting something in like Encinitas, for example.
Well, I guess that's the cost of a good government.
It is. It is. Well, we got a big show today and lots of stuff to cover. And we're going to start off in a similar area. We're going to talk about what's happening in LA. one of the main reasons we want to talk about this, even though it's everywhere, is that Cody has a very unique perspective here because Cody was actually a firefighter in Santa Monica, and your father's also a firefighter, right?
Yeah, he's retired now, but yes.
Retired,
and my grandfather was too, so I'm third generation.
Third generation firefighter in the LA area. And you grew up in Malibu, and you know this area so well. Both of us actually lived really close by to where all the fires are. So we'll kind of dive in here. As we're recording this, just to give some context, there's three main fires that are still raging in Los Angeles right now. There's the Palisades fire, the Eaton fire, and the Hearst fire. A lot of what people think about is like the Palisades fire because that's the one that has the most, it's the least contained. I think it's the largest. It's also the one that's burned the most recognizable parts of Los Angeles, namely the Palisades and Malibu. But just for some scale, because if you haven't been into this area, the area burned is nearly 3 times the size of Manhattan. So around 14,000 acres. Or if you picture the city of Washington, D.C., it's slightly larger than the entire city of D.C. So that's just some context before we dive into to what's going on. I think the current estimate is that it's around $100 to $400 billion in economic losses, 24 deaths, 12,000 homes, and people are without power, gas, and water. It's a really insane event, and I kind of want to dive in here, Cody. You know, you were a firefighter in this area. You know it incredibly well. What happened here? How did this happen? And what do people not know about what's going on down there?
You know, I haven't talked about this at all anywhere. I've kind of maybe saved it from here, but also just don't have interest in talking about it. And it's because I was so deep in this world. I'll do some more bragging right now. I'm also, or was, a California state and federally certified arson investigator, bomb tech, hazardous materials specialist, as well as the first company I founded was a private firefighting company in my 20s, and I sold it. So I have a lot of insight to the private firefighting world right now, which is a hot topic with a lot of controversial takes on that. So I have a lot of, I would say, insider takes to what's going on here. And I would qualify myself as probably one of the few experts who has a pretty well-rounded view on everything going on. I'm also, my family's, by the way, I did not grow up wealthy at all, but my mom's side of the family, they were one of the first families to grow up or live in Malibu. And Malibu back in the day was like, nobody wanted to live out there. It was like cow fields and nothingness. And there's a saying, it's really cheesy now, but Malibu is a way of life. And it really is, because you have to live in a way where you're very exposed to the elements, and wildfire is just part of that. So a lot of what, we'll dive into it in just a second, but a lot of what is going on right now is a lot of these transplants and people in California that are completely freaking out to this event. But in reality, this is natural for California. And the people that have gotten the most hurt, the most damage, and are the most devastated are the ones that are completely taken off guard. And to be clear, this event, of course, is horrible, and it is not a super frequent one in terms of the scale. But this is not at all unpredicted or rare or something that like hasn't happened in the past. And that's what's being lost in this whole thing.
So diving into kind of the question now, like who do you think, there's lots of blame being kind of shifted around, right? There's people talking about, failure of government to, well, I guess there's a couple things that we just talked about, is that it's not rare that it started. Now, as it's progressed and grown and they've really struggled to put it out, is there anything there that you look at and you're like, well, from your experience being a firefighter, had there been mistakes made?
Yes, it's a absolute cluster F of a disaster in terms of the government response. So there's 3 things going on. First of all, the one I just said, this is a naturally occurring event, which is a wildfire to happen. Typically, historically, hundreds of years ago, it started by lightning, or Native Americans would actually start fires, or some other, abnormally. There's also static electricity phenomenon that can happen. But the point is, this entire area of Southern California is meant to burn. In fact, there's certain plants whose seeds don't even germinate unless they have been exposed to fire, because they need the heat to expand. And also the soil needs to be, has to have a certain amount of burned ash to regenerate life. So this is a completely natural part of nature. So I'll just set that aside. The second thing that's very important to understand is the preventative measures that LA, Southern California, and all of California have completely gone away from because they want to preserve the environment. I'm using air quotes on that because they're preserving the environment in ways that academics think is the right thing to do. But if you go on the ground, it's completely setting yourself up for a disaster. One example is brush clearance. There's a thing in California called ESHA, where you cannot clear brush into a certain zone because they quantify it as a natural ESHA area. It's an abbreviation for this area you're not supposed to clear brush out of. And this has pigeonholed a lot of homes and developments right next to wildland interface, which is basically where things burn. So they're setting themselves up for disaster. Then there's a whole water debate as well. But the third thing to all this is the response. The response has been an absolute cluster, and you can really point fingers to the leadership of Los Angeles City specifically. And I don't want to go into that because it's pretty much everyone knows what's going on there. But all the suspicions you may have in terms of the prioritization of DEI and equal opportunity rights and all that versus or instead of merit-based hiring and leadership, that's the problem, 100%. So those three things added up is leading to this just insane disaster that LA is going through right now.
When did you leave being a firefighter, and was that stuff going on? Could you kind of predict and feel that was going on?
Yes. So I left in the late 2010s, like 2018, I think it was. I was a firefighter for almost 10 years there. And I was a municipal firefighter, meaning you worked in the city, but when you have brush fires, you get deployed on strike teams, and you would get deployed a couple times a year to different areas of California. A variety of things I noticed before leaving. One, the homeless issue is no joke, especially in Santa Monica. When you start running the majority of your emergency calls to people who are clearly abusing the system or who are not taken care of properly, but then your resources are allocated to the people who are paying the least amount of taxes, and the people who are paying the most amount of taxes are getting basically shafted, no services at all. That's, like, in my mind, a clear breakdown of society. And then the other part, which you were alluding to, which is this focus on diversification or things that don't have to do with merit. I've talked about this before on other episodes, which is, hey, from the firefighting world, like, you don't care who's next to you. You just want somebody who's strong and knows, strong-willed, strong physically, and knows how to do their job right. As soon as you start jeopardizing that, that's when you're getting in trouble. And that's exactly what's happened in LA and a lot of Southern California. They focus on non-merit-based hiring and strategies versus we know works. And it's in the U.S. military as well. It's an endemic across the U.S.
What about water? And is that an actual... I don't know how much you've dove into, like, do they not have enough water to fight the fires? Like, what have you learned, or what have you seen about the issues related to water and the limited amounts of water that they've had to fight the fire?
So there's several things going on here. First of all, when you have a wind event like they had, which is up to 100-mile-an-hour winds, no water is going to do anything. And a big part of why they ran out of water, I'm going to get to the other part first, but a big part of why they got into this issue is everybody uses water at the same time. It's akin to, like, you're in the house and taking a hot shower, and then everyone turns on the faucet and you run out of hot water. Imagine that scenario, but for water. If everybody in the city or an area turns on water, you're going to run out of water. Your water pressure is going to go down. This is something that's been a problem in California for a century. In fact, when I grew up in Malibu and we fought firefighters as homeowners, you filled up all the trash cans, coolers, everything you could with water prior to a fire because you knew when the fire came, there'd be no water pressure. Everyone's using water. So that is what happened. And when you have a 100-mile-an-hour wind event, people are spraying their homes with water, complete waste. If you have hot, dry, fire-fueled winds, the water gets evaporated in a millisecond. It's literally pissing in the wind. It's just wasting the water. So everybody's spraying their houses down the water, total waste. And that's exactly what was going on in this fire. Okay, the second thing, which is the mismanagement of water in California, that's a fact. And I'm sure that will come out in terms of what's going to happen. The most famous one was the Santa Ynez water reservoir above the Palisades being dry. That's just complete California government failure. I don't necessarily think that that reservoir being full would have saved more homes, but it is a pretty big like issue that homeowners can point to and be like, what, we're some of the highest taxed people in the world and we don't even have basic infrastructure, and they have a right to gripe. That is messed up. I don't necessarily think the water would have saved their homes, but it is something like, what the hell, what's going on there? And then the last thing I would say is, unless you're from there or know the topography of how everything works, it's a very mountainous region. And a lot of people are on well water or the way that water supply is. It's very difficult to explain if you haven't been there. And so there isn't this constant water supply, like city source. There are in some neighborhoods, but a lot of the areas up in the mountains are not like that. So the potential for water to run out or get interrupted is much higher, which again is why everyone individually should be much more prepared.
Sure. So diving into kind of some of the second order consequences of the fire, right? I think one of the things that is happening right now is the rental market in LA is booming. Real estate prices have increased by about 20% because a lot of these, I mean, to put some context, the areas that burned, especially in the Palisades fire, are some of the wealthiest areas in the entire country, world actually. And all those people are out of their homes. They got to go find rentals somewhere nearby. So that's increasing real estate prices. What else are you seeing is like, what do you predict from kind of second order consequences of the fire and where things go from here?
So I'm a little bit hesitant to throw out numbers, even burn numbers like, oh, this fire is contained by this or that. It changes every day, but also we won't know until months from now. But the idea that there is hundreds of billions of dollars on the line here, that is real. In fact, I think it'll be actually much higher than they're even estimating. So you have a couple of things going on. First of all, you have the direct losses. So insurance losses. What are insurance companies on the hook for to replace? That's a cost. The second cost is lack of productivity. If you have an economy shut down locally, like that's clearly a loss. Then the third loss is all these like extra, third order losses, like if people move away. If people are not spending local money, if companies are moving out, all those things combined together, I think is going to be a number that's going to shock a lot of people. And remember, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And this area of California is one huge economic contributor to the state. So this is not a little tiny event from an economic standpoint. In terms of going back to the beginning, which is insurance companies paying out, this is going to be catastrophic in terms of the realized losses that the insurance companies are going to have, because the cost of building in California is so out of control because of all the bureaucracy, because of all the taxes, because of all the BS. To replace these homes, many of them are not going to be allowed to replace. For example, a lot of homes in Malibu are on septic. Well, those houses were grandfathered in, meaning the new laws state that you cannot have a house on septic in certain areas of Malibu. So there's going to be lawsuits there, people saying, I own land, you're not allowing me to rebuild my house because of these new laws that got implemented. So there's going to be lawsuits, and that's a whole nother can of worms. So I just threw out a lot there, but my point is that the costs here are, everyone's trying to throw out numbers. They're going to be huge. I don't know what they are going to be yet, but there are multiple layers of this onion that are going to really impact California.
My prediction is that it continues to push in the direction of any incumbent government getting ousted, right? So there's going to be, I think, a massive swing back in Los Angeles, and leadership will be voted out. Mayor's going to be voted out, and there'll be people coming in with new ideas that are very strongly opposed to the current ideology. So my prediction is it'll continue to move Los Angeles further to the right, and you'll have people that come in with more like common sense, government takes, and probably bad for Newsom as well. It's going to be an interesting change, and hopefully they can contain this here soon, and we won't be talking about it much until we see what happens, right?
Is this California's red pill moment? Yeah, is this California's red pill moment? On one hand, I think, you look at the numbers and say, of course it is, but I also know just how insane a lot of Californians are with having this idealistic way of how things should be versus how reality is. And maybe this is one of those reality moments. A quick side note, there's this video that's been going around online of this rabbit jumping into the fire, and then this guy's freaking out and he's trying to pick up the rabbit to care for it. It's actually from a fire years ago, but it went viral on a lot of social networks saying like, oh, there's humanity in fire. Fire is war, and when you're actually battling a fire, there'll be rabbits and animals running out of the fire on fire. The animals are on fire, and then they're lighting other areas of the fire, like dry brush, on fire. So the firefighters would smack the animals with shovels to kill them, so they wouldn't spread more fire. And I know that sounds horrible, but the point is that when people get exposed to stuff that's so out of their like view of what the world actually should be, it just rocks their world. And this whole rabbit burning issue, I'm like, you have no idea what it's like inside of fire to the average person. And hopefully
Yeah.
once people understand what this actually involves, meaning rebuilding a whole city from the neglect that's been going on because we're caring for all these ideas, hopefully it'll rock people's world and say, you know, we got to rethink how we view things and what we prioritize, and realize that the world's a pretty tough place. And if you don't prepare properly, we're going to run into more disasters like this.
If you have a construction company and you live, you know, within somewhat of the air, within striking distance, not even, maybe even in a different state, you know, moving out to California and being there for the rebuild process is going to be incredibly lucrative, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens here. Because I think there's like such insanity around this price gouging thing. I don't know if you've seen, you knew someone was talking about eliminating price gouging.
There's laws about that right now. So there's laws in California. You cannot have price gouging during emergencies. I actually disagree with this. I don't think people should intentionally price gouge, but that's what a free market is. And as soon as the government gets in the middle of this, it's going to screw everything up.
Well, and just think about what's going to happen. You've got people. Someone's got, let's say, in the Palisades, very common to have like a $4 million house, right?
Average value in Palisades, $3 million. Average value.
Exactly. So let's say your $4 million house gets burned to the ground. You collect insurance money. You get paid $4 million to rebuild your house. One, it probably won't be able to rebuild in the exact same way for that, but that's not the point. And you also have a net worth of $25 million. There's no chance you're not going to spend an additional $1 million and pay a construction company to say, "Hey, take me to the front of the line," right? Is that price gouging? How do you prevent that? First of all, do you even want to prevent that, right? Like, this is the part that starts to get really confusing, is that there's just no way people aren't going to pay millions and millions of dollars to get their house built first. And is that price gouging? Is it not? I'm not sure. I don't know how you can regulate that. And even if you want to regulate that.
Well, not only that, even if things went perfectly, let's say you're a wealthy person with a family, or not even wealthy, or middle, whatever it is, you're out of your house. You got to keep living. You got to move on. So what? You're going to go rent for 3 years while you rebuild? Like, no. A lot of people will, but a lot of people are going to say, screw this. I need to buy somewhere else. I'm out. I cannot put my life on pause while I rebuild in this area that I love, but is going to take forever for me to get back to my normal life. So I'm going to move. And a lot of people are like, oh, you think, you know, Texas and Florida real estate prices are out of control now? Wait until the Californians start leaving and all. I mean, remember, there's 12,000 homes that have been burned. 12,000. That's not 12,000 people displaced, because each home has multiple people. This is a big deal. There's going to be an exodus out of California.
I think it'll end up with prices being higher in those areas and continued boom.
Well, they already are. Like you said, Zillow said houses are already 20% higher in price. People rose their prices that are on the market right now in that Southern California area, because they know people don't have a choice. They're going to move somewhere else if they want to stay there, and they're going to have to pay a premium for it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how it plays out. Yeah, we will see here, and hopefully they can contain it. I want to move on here and talk a little bit about some of the something interesting that came out this week. So kind of the headline is U.S. deaths expected to outpace births within the decade. But really what this came down from a Congressional Budget Office forecast. It forecasted lower population growth in the U.S. over the next 3 decades, and that's lower than it projected 1 year ago. Fertility rates have dropped. It says that deaths are expected to exceed births in 2033. And if you kind of look at this at a larger level, right? What they do is they look at population estimates. So, and they've taken their population estimate for the U.S. to 350 million, which is up by 4 million, but lowered it down for 2054 down to 372 million. So 11 million fewer than just a year ago. So what that means is, okay, in the short term, they upticked a little bit, but in the long term, they drastically lowered the population growth of the U.S. And even though the U.S. still has one of the highest birth rates in the developed nations, they've lowered down their belief about the U.S. fertility rate down to about 1.6. And it's really interesting because population growth in a country is really indicative of how well the country is going to do down the line. So what are some of the, why does this matter, Cody? Like why is this interesting to you, and why is this something that you follow?
I follow demographics pretty closely. I've found investing internationally over the past couple of decades that the demographic course is extremely important in understanding how our economy will grow or not grow. And it's kind of like the three little bears scenario where like, you don't want too much, but you don't want too little. So if you don't have any population growth, you have this scenario, you have like stagflation, kind of like Japan's been going through, where their economy's just bumping along. And it looks like US is headed more towards that area. Conversely, if you have super high population growth, you have a lot of young people. And if your government and your economy isn't built very well, meaning to put those people to work, you can have a lot of instability, a lot of high youth unemployment, which causes, a lot of societal issues, a lot of people not with a direction in life, and they're going to turn to crime or whatnot. So this is surprising to me specifically because the Congressional Budget Office redid their forecast, and as you said, it's a lower projection, and this time when deaths are expected to exceed births is coming 7 years earlier than they previously projected. And this is one of those government things I think is going to keep getting recalibrated. I think it's going to keep getting worse and worse, meaning the situation is going to be worse than they are projecting it, which is fewer people are having babies, which is, again, lowering the birth rate and is going to contract our economy more and more because we don't have that growth unless we have immigration. So this is really interesting to me because I think the U.S. is headed more towards a stagflation scenario if we only look at birth rates. And by the way, the U.S. is by far the best position of the developing nations. So everything we just talked about, Austin, that sounds bad for the U.S., the other countries in developed nations are way worse than the U.S. Way worse.
Well, you think about what one of the, real estate is one of the largest, most important asset classes in the U.S. Asset classes, worldwide. And when populations aren't being rebuilt or replenished, you've got houses, you've got housing that becomes less valuable, right? And Americans hold the vast majority of their wealth in their houses. Not every country is like this, right? You mentioned Japan. They don't hold the majority of their wealth in their houses. It wouldn't make sense. They've got a shrinking, collapsing population. There's many houses over there that you can go and buy for effectively nothing because they don't have a need for more housing, right? They've got actually a need for less housing. It's going to be very interesting, I think, in China as well. China is a good example of a population that is shrinking rapidly, yet they have massive real estate speculation, massive building. And so to your point, like this is happening in the US, it's happening worldwide, but there's really big consequences in some of the larger assets that in growth in the economy and then assets like real estate. I was reading this very interesting article about how Xi Jinping has built this city about 70 miles from Beijing that they're attempting to create this kind of sister city to Beijing to alleviate some of the congestion, the traffic, the overcrowding that's in Beijing. And they've built massive skyscrapers there, and they're actually going to force businesses to move their people over there, but the people don't want to move there because one, there's no amenities, it's boring, they can't see people. And I think it's going to be an interesting experiment to see whether or not this thing works out over the next 10 years. Population's actually declining in China, and they have massive unused skyscrapers that are filled with apartment complexes. Are they going to be filled up, or are they going to be like some of the other cities in China that they're just starting to detonate because they need to protect the real
The
estate market.
Keynesianism economy, we talked about it before, where Keynesianism economy is you bury money and then pay people to dig a hole.
To dig it out?
To
Yeah,
dig it out. It's
exactly.
like the same with the Chinese buildings. You build the building to put
And then
people to
detonate
work
'em.
and then detonate it. And then we're just going to build new buildings. I want to throw up this little graphic here, which is the top 10 lowest fertility rates in the world, because
Yep.
we're talking about this right now. And I'm not stuck on these numbers. These numbers are the most recent, but kind of like the wildfire numbers, you don't really know what's going on. But I think this is a pretty good list. So the lowest fertility rate in the world is in Macau, which of course is a part of China, at 0.68 children per woman. And then you got South Korea, Hong Kong, St. Bart's, I wouldn't say that counts, Taiwan, Puerto Rico, Singapore, Ukraine, Vatican also doesn't count, and then China. So China is the 10th lowest fertility rate in the world, and it's 1 child per woman. That's crazy. That's a society is shrinking. And then conversely, we'll throw up this as well. The 10 highest fertility rates are all in Africa except for Afghanistan. So starting out with Chad with 6 children per woman. Chad, Somalia, the DR, the Central African Republic, Niger, Mali, Angola, Burundi, Afghanistan, and Mozambique. And Mozambique is at 4.69 children per woman. But I guess all those countries, the highest fertility rate in Africa. And I would say, sad to say, but this is more of an argument why Africa is going to continue to be unruly and out of control. That these governments' economies are not built to put this amount of young people to work. At the same time, this is an enormous amount of people being born compared to the rest of the world. So there's going to be massive immigration for decades to come of people leaving Africa to go to these other economies. And it's probably going to cause more and more conflict, as we're seeing right now with a lot of the Middle East immigrants coming into Europe. So I don't know how to
And
bet
also
on that
massive
right now.
massive growth in the African cities.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's the capital of Nigeria? Or of Ghana,
Lagos.
Accra, or Lagos in Nigeria, and Accra in Ghana. They've both seen just massive growth over the past decade.
Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. We're going to shift our focus here and move towards what's happening in Venezuela. We've talked about Venezuela a bunch of times in the pod. And this week, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was sworn in for a new term on January 10th. And this kind of extends his rule in face of some really intense protests, and as well as some intense scrutiny and sanctions from the United States, who believed that he stole this last year's vote. And, we covered this during the summer when it was actually going on. And it's pretty clear there's a lot of fuckery that happened in Venezuela. And so
It's a technical term, by the way.
It's a technical term for what happened down there. The Department of State has increased their reward up to $25 million each for information leading to the arrests of Maduro and his Minister of Interior, Diosdado Cabello, I think is how you pronounce his name. And yeah, it's interesting because there was a lot of talk over the summer of maybe this is the time that Maduro gets ousted. Maybe it's the time that there's a shift in Venezuela. It has not happened. He's being sworn in here, despite criticism from all the G7 countries, and as well as a bunch of countries in South America who are looking at what happened in Venezuela and saying, hey, this is just not a legitimate election. Does this surprise you?
Yes and no. I mean, it doesn't surprise me from the Venezuelan standpoint, which is this dictator holding on for dear life and holding on successfully. And then the part that surprised me a little bit, I guess, is just how the world has not put more pressure on him to, or really backed a coup. And we got a story we'll share in just a moment. But I think that's because of the distraction of Ukraine, everything else going on in the Middle East, domestic issues within the U.S. It's kind of like Venezuela's been put on the back burner. So I guess that's the part that surprised me. It just continues to get this. He's been in power for so long. He's been hated for so long, and he hasn't been ousted yet.
I think it's interesting. There's this, he called for Puerto Rico to be liberated from the U.S. And I think it's interesting because I feel like right now, the way Trump has been talking about Greenland, Panama, Canada, all these like worldwide countries and what should be done here, what should be done there, it's almost inspired other countries and leaders to retaliate and talk about what they want to do. The insanity of him, Puerto Rico, an invasion to liberate from Puerto Rico from the U.S. is just, there's just no chance.
Yeah, Maduro's like, let me get in on this, man. You're taking other countries. I want to get in on this.
Well, I think it's also just like a realization that you can capture headlines, right?
Yeah, of course.
If you start talking about this stuff.
But it's important to realize, too, that Venezuela is backed by Russia and Iran. We've talked about this war. Iran has drone assembly plants in Venezuela. They've diversified some of their military-industrial complex into Venezuela. Iran has. So there's quite a possibility that the leaders in these other countries are encouraging Maduro to poke the bear, which is Trump right now, specifically this Puerto Rico liberation threat. By the way, Puerto Rico, right after Maduro said, U.S., you better save us if he actually does anything here.
Yeah, that'd be the quickest path to a drone strike, I think, is invading.
Yeah, exactly. Can I tell this quick story? Story?
Why don't you dive in? Talk about this story from these ex-Green Beret.
Yeah. So again, we've been following this Venezuela story for a while, and mainly one of the reasons we started following is because of Guyana. We've been down to Guyana, and Maduro has threatened to seize parts of Guyana, and so we wanted to figure out what the hell's going on down there. But go ahead. Right, and I own real estate in Colombia. I go there a lot, and Colombia's on the other side of Venezuela, so I'm very aware of what's going on in Venezuela in terms of what their neighbors think, and of course the U.S. as well. So anyways, military.com, which is a great website, does a lot of internal stories about what's going on in the military, released a story, I think this is yesterday, says an ex-Green Beret behind a failed Venezuela raid in 2020 lashes out at CIA and FBI. So just that story was like, okay, what's going on here? Now, I knew a little bit about this story, and many people might have seen this when this happened, but the guy is now coming out and telling his version of the story, which may or may not be true. So back in 2020, a guy named Jordan Godrew, who's a former Green Beret, was accused of leading a failed raid in Venezuela to overthrow Maduro, and he's now publicly criticizing the CIA and FBI. So Godrew, this guy who's a former Green Beret, claims that the CIA and FBI sabotaged his efforts to remove Maduro from power, asserting that they undermined his mission. So Godrew is in Florida right now, and he has lawyers, and the lawyers are arguing that Godrew had support from the Trump administration for the operation, and was basically saying, hey, I have this political backing from the president. And of course, Trump's like, no, we never said that or did that. And both the CIA and FBI are declined to comment on that. So what happened was this guy, Godrew, at the time, this is back in 2020, there was a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head. And at the time, Godrew got a bunch of Venezuelan army deserters as well as some other Green Berets. And they went into Venezuela, and several people were killed in like a shootout. And the Green Berets, several Green Berets that were in his group, got put in prison, got captured by Venezuela, and were put into Venezuelan prison. This past year in 2024, the U.S. did a prisoner swap and actually got those Green Berets back to the U.S. Now, this is where the story takes an even further twist. Godrew is being prosecuted now in the U.S., and the prosecutors state that there's DNA evidence on the weapons that Godrew was taking from Florida to Colombia that they would then take into Venezuela to do this coup. In addition to that, Godrew spent $90,000 on a yacht that he was taking across the Caribbean to transport all this stuff. And by the way, the yacht sank, and Godrew and another guy got picked up by a freighter ship in the middle of the Caribbean. So this story is like pure movie material in the future. But here's my take on all this. First of all, Godrew might be nuts. There's a lot of people saying that he's got mental issues and He's not the most reliable source. But whether or not this happened, this happened. Like Goju did try to go in there and overthrow Maduro, and there was clear incentive to do it because there was a bounty on Maduro's head.
15 million. Now the incentive's even higher.
Yeah, exactly. So now the incentive right now today, Biden just announced it 2 days ago. There's a $25 million bounty on Maduro and other cabinet members within the Maduro regime. So my point, though, going back to 2020, the CIA and FBI are saying, we don't know this Goju guy. We have no connection to him at all. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I would not be surprised at all if the U.S. completely backed Goju and then just threw up their arms saying we don't know him after he got caught, because this has happened not 1 or 2 or 10 times. This has happened dozens of times around the world, going back to the 50s. The U.S. has overthrown Guatemala, Panama, Nicaragua. There's funny business going on in Vietnam and the Koreas and the stands all over Asia. So the idea that there's not some truth here would be
Unlikely.
there's definitely something going on here. And so
also the incentive is very clear. I mean, even if it's like when it comes down to, you can talk about how involved they were, even if it was having conversations, putting the idea in his head, helping move things along. Because if he spent $90,000 in a yacht, bought 60 weapons, let's say he put in $200,000 for a potential payout of $15 million. That's a pretty good risk return,
but not
especially
only that,
if you are.
If this guy is, mentally unwell right now, like he was a Green Beret and he got other Green Berets to go in with him, and he got other Venezuelan army guys to go in with him, and he was able to transport arms from the U.S. to Colombia, and he was able to get into Venezuela. Like, that's not easy to do at all. And there would have to be some cooperation along the way for that to happen. So the idea that the U.S. government wasn't somehow helping him is like almost implausible to me. Now,
well, they're probably helping someone right now.
100%. And if I was a professional mercenary, $25 million to get Maduro. And by the way, it's not 25 million total. It's 25 million for him. And then there's another 15 million for some other
20
people.
for another guys. Yeah, exactly.
So there's big money on the line here. Not to mention that there is huge corporate interest and government interest behind the scenes that I'm sure are paying even higher bounties for specific accomplishments within Venezuela. So I guess what I'm getting at with here is this is a crazy story, and I can't wait for the movie to come out, but I would not be surprised at all if current operations are happening right now with mercenaries who are seeing these dollar signs on this prize, which is Maduro. And I would only expect this to continue to increase until something actually happens.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story, and yeah,
have you ever seen that meme where it's like, that desire that middle-aged men have to form a mercenary group and go into a foreign country and overthrow a government? That's like a midlife crisis desire of the average male around the world. So there's going to be some guys that do this.
I like that. There's one like that, and there's also another one about venture capital. It's like back in the day, venture capital was, boarding a ship, going around the Horn of Africa and seizing gold and spices and coming back, and like now it's B2B SaaS. Let's dive in a little bit to what just happened with Tether. So one of the things that we talked about in our 12 prediction episodes is that stable coins were going to be big and take center stage in 2025. So Tether, one of the largest stable coins, just moved its operations, or is moving its operations, from the British Virgin Islands to El Salvador after being granted a digital asset service provider license. So as a quote, by rooting ourselves in El Salvador, this is from Tether, we are not only aligning with a country that shares our vision in terms of financial freedom, innovation, and resilience, but it's also reinforcing our commitment to empowering people worldwide through decentralized technologies. So, first of all, very interesting and somewhat unsurprising, in my opinion.
You predicted this.
Well, I mean, I predicted stablecoins are continue to grow and be bigger and bigger and take more of a mind share of the average consumer. And then also, I'll just say I'll predict it.
Yeah, you made a
I
broad
predict
enough
it.
prediction to capture an event like this. So just take it. Just grab your medal and own it.
Well, what I'll share immediately from this is that this is like the challenge that governments are facing today with some of the fastest growing companies in the world and trying to secure their like tax base. It's so easy for these companies to just pick up and go where they're treated best, you know? And this is why creating a favorable situation for companies to thrive and do business is so important. It's not like it was. It's not like, Tether's an important company, and on the global stage, it's not the way that it was in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, where you can't move a GM plant in the 50s, right? You're not going to move. It's not going to move from the U.S. somewhere else. It could happen, but the difference between moving a large company like Tether and moving a plant, it's very, very different. So,
well, let's dive into a little bit of the specifics here, because there's some numbers that are going to shock some people here. So really quickly, as if people don't know what Tether is, we've talked about it before, but Tether is a US dollar stable coin. So one Tether coin is pegged to one US dollar. And what this is used for is to make transactions in the crypto world, knowing that you can transact in a currency that is stable or stable relative to the US dollar. The two biggest ones are Tether's the biggest stable coin in the world. The second biggest is USDC. USDC is run by a company called Circle in the United States, and it's much more regulated than Tether. And it's the preferred, let's say, stable coin of most institutions, like Coinbase. Coinbase uses USDC. Yep. So Tether is much bigger because it's used internationally. It was kind of like the first major player to really grab market share. Now, here's some crazy statistics. And just like you were saying, Austin, this company is not run by hundreds or even thousands of people. It's got like a team of a dozen, because all they're doing is they're issuing cryptocurrency or stable coins that are backed by US treasuries. And here is a crazy statistic. Right now, Tether is the 18th largest holder of US treasury bonds in the world. And that was per Q3 of 2024. They have not released their Q4 results for 2024 yet, but so like 4 months ago, they were the 18th largest holder of US treasury bonds in the world. That puts them above Germany, Australia, and even the UAE. So this is a tiny company with literally a dozen people owning more treasury bonds than actual foreign countries, which is wild. And here's the really crazy part. So if you're holding these treasury bonds, they have a yield on them. So if you're backing a stable cryptocurrency with treasury bonds, there's a yield on those bonds because it's US debt, and the US is paying an interest rate on that. And this is crazy. In Q3 of last year, Tether profited $2.5 billion, and the cumulative amount was $7.7 billion for the year. So I think
that's in the first 3 quarters.
Right? I think for 2024, I would not be, and by the way, like I said before, a Q4 report has not been released yet. Should probably be coming out in the next couple of weeks. I would not be surprised at all if Tether had more than $10 billion of net profits for their company, for a group of a dozen people. That's insane. It's wild.
It's almost $1 billion a person.
We should do that.
We got to fact check that. I don't know if what their actual. We have to fact check the number of employees at Tether.
Oh yeah, we need to fact check the people can chime in on this, but all the numbers I just read were on their press release, audited by BDO. Can we look that up right now while we're talking?
Tether's got 172 employees.
Oh man, I was wrong on
12. That. So, but still, I mean, when you break that down, the profit per employee, it's unbelievable, and yeah, that is unbelievable.
So $10 billion profit with less than 200
and
employees.
There's also been controversy. So yeah, there's somebody posted about this, the most profitable company ever. This is when they had 100 employees. They were at $45 million per employee. This was about 8 months ago.
I want to fact check your fact check. What I read with a dozen part, maybe that was like the equity holders.
That was 3
in it.
years ago. That was 3 years ago.
I know, but I still think a lot of those employees are not equity holders. They're just salaried employees. My point was more that the amount of money that the company's divvying up was amongst a very small group of people.
You gonna fact check my fact check?
I'm going to fact check your fact check. We know we got a community note or fact check.
Yeah, apparently they're going to double their staff by mid 2025, mostly in compliance and finance. So, yeah, unbelievably profitable company. And when you consider how easy it is for them to move, that's a big problem, right? It's a big problem or a big challenge for countries to figure out how do you maintain these. Everyone wants. Every government wants a company that's profiting 10 billion a year in their country
and that's what we didn't really talk about, El Salvador. So they're moving from BVI to El Salvador, and part of that reason is because El Salvador, as most people know, is the Bitcoin country. You got the President Bukele, who's the world's most loved dictator, attracting capital and people, and this is a great company for El Salvador to point to for their success with Bitcoin. But the other side of this is that Europe recently implemented a lot of restrictions for Tether itself, and I believe part of the moving of jurisdiction from the BVI to El Salvador probably had to do with both of those, meaning El Salvador saying come to our country, and the regulatory environment within EU, cracking down on Tether's ability to do business.
And it's also interesting that they are a Hong Kong company, registered in Hong Kong. So this is where it all gets confusing is a Hong Kong company doing business in British Virgin Islands, moving to El Salvador. How do you slice up the pie, right? And every government's trying to slice up the pie. Yeah, well, we'll see. Hopefully they continue to make a positive environment and then there's some more clarity in the U.S. so some of these companies can come to the U.S. and do business and be taxed in the U.S. A lot of these companies are just, I think, looking for low taxes, but also clarity on what they can and can't do. You don't want to be pursued with legal action or put in jail for something that, let's say, was legal and then is now no longer legal, or those sorts of things. Cody, you have an adventure update. I see you wrote it down in our notes. I don't know anything about your adventure update.
Oh man, this is a big surprise. So the last episode we talked about adventures, like what are we looking forward to? And I had mentioned I've got a surf trip at the end of April to Peru. I'll throw it out there again. If anybody wants to join, reach out because I got a couple more spots there. But I forgot to mention I'm going to Colombia next month to climb a mountain, a big mountain.
Cool.
It's like, I don't know, it's pretty high. Like we got crampons and ice picks and all that. So I'm just doing it with two other buddies, but I wanted to mention it because it's a little bit of a recon. I was thinking maybe if this trip works out pretty well, we could replicate it again later in the year.
Cool.
Mountain climbing is fun. You get away from your cell phone. You're completely off the grid. Plus it's hard. You're at altitude, you're getting dirty, and you're having fun with a bunch of, friends, and it makes you really close. So I'm doing some recon for us. So maybe we can replicate the trip later again this year.
What does that trip look like? Where do you fly into?
I fly into Armenia, not Armenia, the country. There's a city in the coffee district of Colombia called Armenia. So we fly in there direct, by the way, Florida to Armenia direct. And then we, get in a truck, drive for an obscenely long time, and then get dropped off at the base of the mountain. We have a guide. So it's like a full thing where, you need a permit to climb the mountain and all that. And it's big, and we'll be on the mountain for a while until we climb the summit and become conquerors of the useless. That's Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia's saying when you climb a mountain. Like, it doesn't help anything. You climb a mountain, so what? You conquered nothing. The conquerors of the useless.
I like it. And then, so for you, have you been eyeing this for a little while?
Yeah, I've done other mountain climbs.
Came up.
It kind of came up. I've done Whitney in the U.S. I did that. I ran it, and then I've done Kilimanjaro in Africa, and I've done some other ones around the world. And I just actually don't operate very well at altitude personally. It's migraine headache the entire time, but it's a really cool experience to just be completely away from everything with some good friends and just have that good bonding experience. And my buddy who lives in Colombia found a cool outfitter that we're going to go on this mountain that you don't think of ice and snow when you're in Colombia, but they have that there, and we're going to go do it. And, just step away from the wild world.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into some hiking in Oregon as the weather continues to. I mean, we're still middle of January right now, so it's wet. It's not that appealing to hike. Done a couple of hikes, but you got to be like full rain gear. You know, you basically are just hiking in rain gear.
Yeah, but that's kind of
And
good for you too. Like that's a good
I
extreme
like it.
activity, and it brings you back to nature.
I like it. I mean, I took my son on a hike during kind of the holidays, and we're just put our rain gear on, hiked through the rain. It was super fun. We had a great time. But it's so nice when it is summertime in the Pacific Northwest and you can just kind of go out with way less gear. And it's beautiful. And I'm looking forward to exploring. But yeah, would love to hear from you guys. One of the things that is fun about the show and hosting the show is hearing from people listening, and would love to hear if you've got some exciting adventures that are going on this year that are inspiring to you. Shoot us a message on Twitter. It's probably the best way. If you post on Twitter, hit us up. You can find Cody or Austin. It's at Cody Shirk. And then for me, it's at Abron, _Braun. And yeah, you just find it Austin Bronner and Cody Shirk on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. What are you excited about? What are your adventures that you're doing this year? And we would love to get kind of a, community going and talking a little bit about what are some fun things to do to get out and keep firing each other up and staying inspired to get out of the office and get on those mountains, get the crampons on, or do something else. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We will be back next week. We'll talk to you guys soon.